So what I wanted to start and get kind of a jump start on was trendables, the trendable configuration, basics of trendables, adding trendables, how they're stored in the system. Because for some of our customers, and when I was first learning about NLign, it took me a while to kind of wrap my head around it. So I wanted to make sure we have plenty of time to cover that, different methodologies for making sure the system is set up the way that you need so that you can get your trendables in and working properly. So some of you may have seen this before, but it bears repeating. The terminology that we're going to use is models, assets, trendables, and trendable types. So a model is any 3D CAD, FEM, CATIA file, an IGES file, a step file. And then an asset could be a collection of models. You can have assets that don't contain any models. That is possible. But typically an asset contains one or two models. So you could have both your design model and your FEM model under the same asset. I like to think of assets as a collection of information about the 3D information of a part or an aircraft. So you can kind of think of asset in that way. It represents a specific aircraft or a specific configuration of the aircraft, a specific part or a specific part revision. A trendable is a specific piece of data. It's a specific record that has been filled out with information. A trendable type is kind of like a blank sheet of paper. The trendable type describes what people are going to fill out to record a specific record or a specific trendable. NLign stores information in the database in two ways. Either something is tied to the asset, like the models. The models are loaded into an asset. The specific trendables that are filled out with information, such as a crack has a 1/4 inch crack on it, and it was found at this date. Something like that is the trendable, and it's stored with the asset. Named regions, stored views, and folders are all tied to the assets. The information that is independent of assets are the trendable types, which we'll be starting to talk about today. The custom lists and the custom fields. So these are pieces of information that are independent of any asset. You can imagine something like a trendable type of crack or a trendable type of FOD could be used across multiple fleets of aircraft, across multiple parts. You could have the similar fields to describe the crack and have them on different assets or different planes. Okay, kind of a refresher of trendable fields. Trendables can have 7 different types of fields: a location, an X, Y, and Z, a text field where you can type in anything you want, a numeric field, all you can type in are numbers, dates, lists that are pre-populated, NLign users, and links or URLs. Links can be helpful if, let's say, someone's filling out a record, a piece of information, and there might be some type of technical documentation, some type of engineering that describes how they should be doing this inspection, how they should be recording this record. You can link directly to that in your specific trendable. So this is one example of how you might divide up 2 different trendable types. The first is called inspection. It's a specific trendable type, and it has 4 fields here. It has an aircraft field, which could be a tail number, and that is pulled from a list. It has a date it was inspected. That's a date field. A description, which is just a text field, and assigned based, which is also a list field. This could be the parent trendable. And within trendable types, you can link trendable types to each other. So what that does for you is the child trendable can inherit or receive the information from the parent. So these 4 fields that are on the inspection can be tied to the child trendable. And what that does is, let's say I'm filling out an inspection and I'm supposed to inspect, let's say 10, 20, 100 holes. So I fill out the general information about the inspection, what the inspection criteria was, who the inspector was, the date it was inspected, the base it was inspected at, maybe some engineering documentation about how the process was conducted. And I fill that information out once, and then as I'm filling out the child for each individual hole or each individual discrepancy, all I've got to do is point that to the parent and say, this is the parent inspection record. And then all of these fields that were previously filled out will be auto-populated in the child. So that can save me a lot of time if I set up my system properly, such that I only have to input information once for these 100 holes. And then on each hole, I just make sure I click the parent saying, this is the parent inspection that this hole is tied to, or this discrepancy is tied to. So then for this discrepancy, I've got a specific panel. It's a drop-down list, a specific surface, a location field, what type of discrepancy this is, maybe a clock position for the crack, comments or description, a date, a fuselage station. So these are just one example of how I might set up a couple of trendables. When I'm going to add trendables, I can either click on the orange plus sign, or I can go File, New Trendable. And then this is the general interface of how I would record information for the trendables. So we just talked about linked fields where a parent can receive information, where a child can receive information from the parent. So that's what these orange triangles are here. You can see these orange triangles on the right, this aircraft and the date inspected and the assigned base. All I've got to do on this inspection field is point to which parent, which specific inspection this discrepancy is recorded on, and then these triangle fields will pre-populate. So that's what these triangles indicate, is that these fields are linked fields from the parent. They inherit the same information that the parent has recorded on it. But I wanted to start into the admin Trendable Management. We talked about earlier, the trendables are agnostic of assets. You can have, say, a crack or a FOD trendable type that you can use across multiple different assets. Typically, people think of trendables in the reverse order that they're created in NLign. This large box kind of indicates your trendable type. It's your nonconformance, your defect type, or your record type. And then inside your trendable, you're going to have multiple fields. Your field is just a piece of information or data that helps describe one aspect of your record. We showed an example earlier, and I could have these multiple fields here. One of the specific types of fields is the list field. Another example of a list field could be the state abbreviation list, right? I can have all 50 states and their 2-letter abbreviation code input as a list. This list could be referenced by a field that I would choose one of these things by. Another list that could be used over and over could be like a yes/no or a pass/fail list. And then I could name different fields saying, was the dye penetrant inspection done, yes or no? And then I'd link that field to the yes/no list. I could say, did the NDI inspection pass, yes or no? And I could link that to the yes/no list. So I can have a list referenced by multiple fields. Are there any questions on trendables and trendable types and fields and lists? So here's another example of a linked and copied fields. These are the two types of fields that we have. Linked fields inherit attributes from the trendable that they're linked to and update anytime the parent is updated. Here we've got an example of a parent, and the parent has some family income, has some eye color field, has some height, and a date of birth. First child maybe has a linked field. We want to know what the family income is for this child. And then it inherits the attribute of the eye color from the father and then has their own height. And then child 2 has a linked field to the family income, but copies the father's height and has their own eye color. So this is kind of, a silly example of how the different linked and copied fields happen. As soon as the parent's family income changes from $100, let's say they get a raise, to $200, the child field of family income will change to $200. Let's say for Halloween, the parent puts in some contact lenses and change their eyes from brown to pink or red or something crazy, right? The child does not get updated when that happens. They keep the same eye color as they always had. So similar with an aircraft or a tooling fixture, right? You could have a last service date, and that's an example where you would want to have a copied field, because whenever the part was created or repaired on this tool fixture, You want to know when that tool fixture service date was at the time that that part was created. Part number B was fixed in '05, and then this tool had been serviced in '05. So then we can compare these two parts and say, hey, part A was created when the tool was within the service date life that it was supposed to. It was serviced that same year. But part B, which we've had extra failures on, was either created or repaired a year. This tool was out of service. It had missed its service date by a year when this part was created. So this copied field gives us information about when this record was created, what was this specific attribute of the tool fixture. We don't want part B to update in 2011 when it gets serviced again, because this wouldn't capture that information of was or was not the tool out of service when this part was created or repaired. That's an example of where you'd want to use a copied field. So let's do an example now. Let's say we've got an employee and they've got a name, a phone number, a building number, and last timesheet training date. And then we've got some specific work group, and we've got some fields in there, manager, building number, and the last timesheet training date. Which of these fields might be linked fields, and which of these fields might be copied fields for the employee? So let's say the work group moves buildings, right? I would want to make sure that was updated.
Eugene, there's also a message from someone online that says name and phone copied.
So for the name and phone number of this specific employee, probably would not be a linked or a copied field from the work group, right? For the manager, it would be a linked field. For the building number, I would make that a linked field. For the timesheet training date, that would be either a copied or a linked field, depending on if the employee only gets trained the first time they join. Then I would just copy over the training date of the timesheet training, or let's say if you have some type of a mentor or a trainer, that would be a copied field, because you want to retain, hey, who trained this employee when they first joined? So, but the individual employee name it might be, my name is Eugene, my phone number is 123. None of that information would be linked to what's my work group, right? So this work group might be called engineering. Manager is Jane Doe. Building number is 3. And then specific dates and trainers or mentor names.
So it looks like Curtis was asking, I've noticed that some fields are NLign specific, security class, custom ID, and I can't remove them. Why is that?
So the custom ID is generated. Some fields you cannot remove from a record in NLign because they're generated by the NLign system itself. So when a record was created, when a record was modified, which user modified or created that record. Security class custom ID, I believe, may also be fields that you cannot change. ID is a field that NLign generates as well. There is a way to set up rules in NLign such that you can create a custom ID for a specific record. Is there a specific custom ID that you'd like to change or add?
No, I was actually hoping to remove some of these fields that I'm not using.
Okay. So if you go to the specific Trendable type, it'll have all of the fields that you are allowed to add or subtract from your Trendable type. For this specific example, I've got a serial number, a tail number, an inspection, a description, a due date. When, however, I go to the results window, since we were just looking at the eddy current inspection, let me add a filter in of Trendable type. And all I want to see is the eddy current inspection. Go ahead and run that. So by default, NLign has every field for every Trendable highlighted, but I can show only the columns for my specific Trendable. Right, and so this ID number right here is auto-generated by NLign. I cannot remove this ID. I can hide it. I can say, hey, I don't want to see this ID. There we go. It's alphabetical, so I just click on there. And so this is no longer shown in my results window. I could have things that I really care about, like the Trendable type or maybe tail number. I can click and drag this over to the left. See, I really care about the tail numbers, what I care about. I don't want to see the NLign ID. A couple of other fields that you cannot delete or remove from your Trendables are who it was created by, the creation date, asset type, security class. I mean, I can right click and say, I don't care about security class, so please just don't show it on my results window. Some of the different field types we talked about. One of the most powerful fields are list fields. And the reason list field is one of the most powerful fields is because it restricts the user to select a specific piece of information. They can't ad hoc add in extra info. They can't do typos. They can't accidentally type in 9 when they mean 6, and so on and so forth. So if we come over to admin custom list configuration, here I've got my YesNo list that I was talking about earlier. Let's say I want to add a new list. And I've got something like a serial number. I don't know every single serial number, so I can't add every single serial number to this list. But what I can do is I can allow users to add items to this list with a formatting pattern. So if I click on this pencil, I can add a formatting pattern to my list. So even though I don't know every single serial number, I can restrict the data that is entered into NLign with this formatting pattern rule. The way these rules work is they go left to right, rules by each character. So let's say for my serial number, I know that every serial number in my shop or in my plant starts with AN. Right? So I can type in this static text. And so my first two characters must be AN. And maybe after that, there's a dash. So I can add that in. After that, maybe there are a couple of lowercase letters. So allow 2 lowercase letters. And for that, I set the maximum and the minimum to 2. I set it to lowercase, and it's dynamic. It can be anything in the alphabet from A to Z as long as it's a lowercase letter. There are 2 lowercase letters after that. So far I've got capital AN, a dash, 2 lowercase letters, and then I can add some digits. Let's say there's 3 digits after that. And here you can create your own hint, or you can go with the default. So the default hint is just this AN dash AA and then 3 digits. I could create any type of hint that I want. Enter the AN dash AB dash 1, or nope, I don't have another dash. Whoops. And AB123 serial number. And then I always recommend, especially at something that's somewhat complex like this, to test your different values. So if I put AB instead of AN, is that still going to work? So this text is invalid because I have a B instead of an N. And then give it 4 numbers instead of 3. That is also invalid. If I do ZZ instead of A, that is valid because I have the AN, the dash, 2 letters, and 3 numbers. Any questions on list item formatting rules? If I get the order wrong, I can use these arrows to adjust the order, up or down. If I made a mistake, I can delete it or edit it. So let's say, for example, instead of 3 numbers, I could have 3 or 4 numbers. So that's when I'd set the minimum to 3 and the maximum to 4 characters. So then I could have a 1, 2, 3, 4, but not a 1, 2, 3, 5. So these formatting rules really, really help as far as keeping your data clean, making sure that everything that someone enters is going to be correct and at least in a format that would be valid. It's not going to stop them from typos such as typing in 1234 instead of 1243. So you could get bad entries that way, but it's going to really, really restrict the number of errors that you have in your data. So that's why the list fields is one of the most powerful types of fields in NLign, is because you can restrict the type of data even if you don't know the entire set in the list. And so I can see the type of lists here. For the yes/no list, it is a fixed list. I do not want anyone adding maybe to my yes/no list. And that's because I have not checked this box that allows users to add to this list. If I have a really long list, I can do a CSV import. Let's say I've got, let's say, the 50 state abbreviation codes that we talked about earlier. I could easily, grab that off the internet, store it in a CSV file, and then import it here. That way I don't have to sit here typing every single list entry in this field. But if my list is small, yes or no, I can quickly just add it here. So here I've got a sometimes in my yes/no list. So I'm going to remove that. I just wanted to show that's how you add something to the list. You could also export it. Let's say someone else has done a lot of great work in NLign. You've inherited their system, and they've got a great list of all the part numbers. Or, let's say in the beginning you started off with some type of a formatting pattern, and then you realized, hey, as everyone's been inputting all these serial numbers or these part numbers, I didn't have the complete list, but now after a year or two, every single part number has been added. I could export this list, maybe clean it up, make sure there's no bogus part numbers in there, import it back in, and then uncheck the box that allows people to add to the part number list. So that's one way, say if you're a new administrator and maybe you just don't have time to grab all the part numbers, you could set up a formatting pattern or just let people add to this list. And then in the future, you can come out, export it, clean up the data, and then import it back in and clean the list. Another thing you can do is, let's say you create a really nice list, and after a while you come in and you say, hey, there's or a nice list of, say, defect codes or root cause analysis reasons. You can come in here and say, just delete all of the entries that have never been used on a specific record. So for the root cause analysis, let's say you have something like some event that really doesn't happen that frequently or no one really uses it. You can come in here and clean that off the list.
Hey, for importing list fields, is there, or I guess just importing possibly in general, is there formatting out somewhere that we can access to see how this gets imported nicely for format? Or is it best to export, look at formatting, and then import?
It's pretty easy. It's just a single column of, just one for each entry. You just put in an entry and then a comma and then your next entry. So for lists, it's fairly easy. I've already named the list here, so I don't even need the yes/no in my list, or for the state abbreviation code, for example. It's just a single column or a single row. It's pretty simple for the importing and exporting lists. For the Trendable types, on the other hand, I do recommend exporting a specific Trendable type first. And the reason why is because these header names are very case specific. So I don't think I have anything super complicated here. But let's say, for example, I misspell Trendable type or something in my CSV file. And then when I try and do an upload, it'll give me an error. It's not going to upload properly. So I do recommend, if you've got a bunch of records that you'd like to input into NLign, to first do an export. So I could select, one or a few of these records, export it, and then it will export the correct names for these headers. And so I would just delete the one entry that I had as my example to create my CSV. Then I would populate it with all the eddy current inspections that had previously been done, and then it would import right away. That's what I would recommend doing.
Maybe this is a linked field question more than it is a list field. But if I were to select a specific list value, is there a way to link it so that it shows, so that the following field gives a specific, returns a specific either value from another list, or pulls up, I guess, say a different list, depending upon the value that I selected in the first field?
Yeah, that's a great question. Several of our customers have asked us to do something like that, to once you select something from the drop-down list, to say change the fields that are in the Trendable type. I believe that is currently in the works for one of the future revisions. Currently, you cannot do that. I know you've seen multiple forms online where you select, hey, you know, I live in a certain state or in a certain region, and then it adjusts, you know, either the data that you need to input or what is displayed next, right? NLign currently cannot do that.
So I'm thinking in terms of, you know, the number of say fasteners on a aircraft, right? And each one has their own fastener hole number. It'd be so much easier to just limit it to, say, one region and have the numbers within that region.
Ah, right, yeah. One of the ways you could try and do something like that, let me see if I have a good example here. I mean, for these different fastener holes, I think you'd have to either put it on a different asset, or you just have to filter by, you know, you could start each one with, you know, a section of the aircraft in your naming scheme. So instead of just having this NAS hex fastener, I could have like aft NAS hex, forward, or some region of the aircraft. As I'm searching in here for NAS hex, say I've got, you know, thousands and thousands of fasteners, and a big handful of them are NAS hex. And so, you know, I'm trying to figure out, hey, is this the fastener that is on the forward part or the aft part? What I would probably recommend doing is adding that to my naming scheme here. That way I could start filtering by aft or forward, something like that.
I think the other option of having that feature added in would probably be more helpful, but I just see what you're saying.
Okay, linked fields. So there are two things that we call linked fields. There's the URL fields, and there's the linked fields we were talking about between parent and child. Go to admin custom field, and I want to add in a link field in the custom field side. It'll ask me, first of all, do I want users to be able to add more than one link to this field? So I say yes. Okay, so now I've got a YouTube channel field type that someone could enter in for this. But it could just as easily be called, say, engineering documentation or something like that. So if we come back to our crack, and we'd like to add in a standard field, we can come into this YouTube channel, and then when the users go in to create a crack, then they've got a link field here. So, and this could be, you know, some, so you've got to add HTTP. There we go. So then on this record, I could link directly to this URL. So I could link to some engineering documentation. I could link to some type of inspection that was used to record this record. I could link to anything like that. And then once I click it, it should take me directly to that URL. So here's our YouTube channel, right? NLign Analytics. So this can be helpful if you've got some type of internal URL for recording different engineering information that you want associated with this record. That way you can take them directly to that URL link. So here I've got a linked field, which is the tail number, which is designated by the triangle, and then the URL link field, which is designated by this chain to add or edit a new link or to remove the link. Text fields are the weakest fields in NLign as far as keeping your data clean. It is nice to have some type of a description field in most records. That way, if there is extra information that the fields don't represent, someone can add extra information into here in kind of a paragraph or a sentence manner. But it's also dangerous as far as keeping the quality of your data clean because, again, people can type in anything they want to into this field. They can span multiple lines. You can search these fields for partial words or phrases, but they can't be used in charts. There's pluses and minuses. The plus side is they can put anything they want and they can record a ton of data inside of them. The minus is you can't use them in charts. They're not very controlled as far as the quality of information that gets put into there. So they're dangerous in that regard. You can merge different list items. One of the most important things as far as keeping data clean is requiring certain fields. So anytime there's an asterisk next to a field, that indicates that that field is required for the user to save the record. So if I go to my Trendable type configuration, and I open up one of my Trendable types, I can see on the required field which of these fields are actually required. So let's say I'd like to control my data a little better. I'd like to make sure that my part number, my depth, my length, my width are all filled in before someone closes or saves and closes this record. So if I go to the edit button over here on this specific field, I can add that this field is required. That basically just says, do not let the user save this record without making sure that this field has some type of an input into it. So same thing for the depth, width, and length. I can just edit these and make sure this is, at some point you may have a Trendable type that has multiple fields, let's say 20 fields or something. So these field headings can kind of help break up and show the user where they're supposed to put different pieces of information. I'm going to add a heading in here that says defect size information. And then for the help text, I'm going to leave that blank for now. On the depth, I'm going to add some help text that says use gauge and record to nearest thousandth. Okay, go ahead and save that. And then as I go to record a new dent record or Trendable, you can see this defect size header information now. I've got this header that kind of breaks up the monotony of me reading through this. So I can quickly see, hey, this is where I'm supposed to put the size information in. So then I can enter a length, width, depth. And then if I try to save it without one of the required fields, it gives me an error. It says, hey, we're missing a value for this IAT inspection. Now it's saying, hey, you need a location for this. I've got a part number as well. So now it should allow me to save. So I highly recommend thinking strategically about which fields you should require your users to enter, how you should break up and order the fields in your Trendable types, and what type of formatting rules you should add to your lists. So it's kind of a quick summary of what we went over today. Trendable types contain custom fields One of the most powerful custom fields is the custom list because it restricts what users can enter into by either using a formatting rule or a list that users cannot add to. The Trendable type is the record type or the form, and you can require certain fields to be input before it can be saved. We talked a little bit about URL or link fields, where people can enter in a URL as one of the entries that will automatically link to that URL. We talked about parent and child relationships, where certain trendables can inherit information from the parent trendable. And next week, we'll go over that more in depth as far as what, how to set up linked and copied fields and how that actually looks like, how that actually works.